All right, welcome to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead, pour white lightning straight on your brain. And we're going to start with the white lightning of Robert Jordan's Eye of the World, which has been a bit since we've talked about it. We said we would last time. We're not going to get as far as we wanted to. We wanted to get up through where they leave Camelin, which is, I don't know, chapter way far away from here. It's basically after they leave Camelin, you could basically say they're into the climax of the story. So we're not going to get that far because Sam's got a bunch of other junk he wants to rant about.
Yeah, and you're going to see this one labeled part one because we're going to do Wheel of Time as part one, but it's kind of a continuation of the talk because we're going to get into some sociology as part two because I wanted to go over some important concepts such as the difference between guilt and shame, the difference between empathy and compassion, and then also what one of the gnawing issues is with current society, which is young men. If we want to look at anything from a social standpoint, and everybody says, oh, it's the patriarchy, oh, it's this, who's really suffering regardless of race or anything is actually young men right now. And that's a building crisis that's going to explode at some point because they're not fully part of productive society yet. And actually that's where a lot of the stuff we're going to go over today in Wheel of Time comes in, because we're seeing the development of these young characters coming out of the village. And this is an important part, which is why we're probably not going to get as far as we wanted to, because there's so much development that Jordan goes over. And this is where he does a really good job of what one thing we complained about with the show was showing the passage of time, which actually I think he kind of got away from in the later books.
Yeah, things start to speed up.
Yeah,
which noticeably.
And I wish he would have actually, in hindsight, looking back, I wish he would have taken things like traveling and made them more exclusive. Whereas it became just kind of a normal thing by book 8 or 9. So no more spoilers on that, but it's the passage of time is the point. you get a sense of how long these people were traveling to get where they got.
We're preparing for what was coming. But let me, have you got share screen on? For me,
almost. Let me, there we go.
I'm going to shamelessly share something here because I think it really fits, and because I love this show. Okay, let's see, make sure I share the right screen here. Don't want to accidentally share my Final Fantasy 14 video and let everyone know how big nerds we are. Oh, wait, hold on. Share sound. There we go. Okay, so this is a clip from, and this will make sense in a second. The best part of Band of Brothers, which is to me top 10 TV of all time.
That was a good show.
The best part of it was the interviews with the veterans before each episode. And I found a video of all of those clipped together, all those put together. If you get the DVD, there's an extended interview that's all together. And anyway, it's great stuff. But I thought of this when I read the beginning of chapter 21 here.
I think everybody had fear. I think there's people that can handle fear. I think I was probably one of them. I think I was just as scared as anybody else, except I could think.
It's a feeling you would not let yourself down, and you would not let your comrades or your unit down.
We all had fear, but we all had training to know that you try to handle your fear and work to accomplish what you're supposed to be doing.
So last time we ranted about strong female characters and how modern writing gets it so wrong with men. And we see that again right here with the opening with Nyneave. She's petrified. This is way out of her league. This is not something, these are things that are stories, even though for a lot of the world, it's well-established fact that Trollocs are very real. The Trolloc Wars were a thing that they mention. They don't go into detail yet. but you know that those were a thing. But for a lot of people, those were things that are way in the past, and now it's nothing but stories. And now it's right here in front of her face trying to kill her. And she's terrified, but she's not going to let that stop her doing what she needs to do. It's not going to let it stop her from helping those that she feels not just duty bound, but also has a personal connection to help. That's what makes a strong character. These men that we praise as heroes, and they don't think of themselves as heroes. That's why we praise them. It's not just what they did. It's the fact that they were just, for the most part, normal guys who did extraordinary things because they wouldn't let that fear control them. And so you can't do that. You can't write that if you're coming from this woke CRT perspective that says the oppressed, the historically oppressed groups cannot be flawed. If you show them with a flaw, then you are being discriminatory. You are being some kind of ist. Okay, so here we have a woman with a flaw. She's stubborn, she's scared, but she's not going to let that fear control her, and she's going to use that stubbornness. Yes, sometimes it's a flaw, but she's going to use it to her advantage to keep pushing forward here.
Yeah, and I just, everybody in the audience, look back, hopefully there's some moment in your life where there's something that scares the shit out of you, but you still did something. My personal anecdote is when we were at the Grand Canyon. I've told this story before in earlier episodes before we were doing the Wheel of Time, but I've got a little bit of a problem with heights. You get me on a ladder and I get a little dizzy. So Grand Canyon, obviously I was staying 20 feet from the edge, even though I wanted to look over and see it all. It was the only where the rails were the only places I would go to the edge. And well, there weren't rails everywhere. And I'm surprised only 4 people fall a year because of the way people were acting out there. But my son wanted to pet a dog, and he starts backing up, trying to get the attention of the owner, only he's backing up towards the edge. And me, who can't even go close to the edge, sprinted over there, slid, grabbed him, and made him turn around and look where he was and get him away from there. And he was about that far from the edge. And it wasn't one of those where it's a gradual drop either. This was where it goes straight over. In fact, I have a video from that trip where I'm at one of the rails looking down, and I say in the video, and I left it in there, even though it's kind of tasteless with what happened, because it's a reminder. I said, this isn't a bump, 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 go. This is a plop, something like that in the video, because it was about 700 foot straight down in a 90-degree angle edge. And that moment, looking back, my heart rate's still going up. I'm actually sweating a little bit just telling the story. And but that's something that scares the shit out of me, which is kind of heights. And dad vibe went through and pulled me to the edge of it to keep him from hurting himself. He might not have kept walking back, he might have, we don't know. And I'm glad we don't know, because I stopped him. Everybody think back to that moment where you did something even though you normally would have been scared if you had a choice, really.
This is why this story and stories like this work, because Jordan does such a good job of making these characters real, because they are multidimensional. As much as I love the Lord of the Rings, one of the reasons it doesn't resonate with as many people is because the only real people there are the hobbits. And that was kind of on purpose, is the hobbits were intentionally the everyman character.
Are you talking about the movies or the book?
No, I'm talking about the books. It was one of the things they didn't do quite as well in the movies, is except for they do Boromir well, where he is a flawed multidimensional character. But in the books, Aragorn is not how he is in the movies. He doesn't really have that doubt. He is an archetype. He was written as an archetype. Gandalf was written as an archetype. So we're Legolas, and so we're Gimli. Those the dwarves, the elves, all these other characters were written as archetypes from his study and research and love of ancient folklore and myths and legends.
Well,
the Hobbit was the everyman.
Where I can give them a little bit of leeway there, and this is something we talk about. Look at the development of Lan versus Nyneave, because Lan is an archetype almost, and same with Moiraine and everything. We see a little bit of development, and it's actually a development where they're coming back down to earth almost, versus going up. And you see the same with Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli and all those. But let's take a modern sports example. So you look at, Michael Jordan, LeBron James, Kobe Bryant, all of these. It would be like them going to a high school game to recruit more people. That they're already there. We didn't get to see the work and the development that got them there. They were already there when the story started. So we're taking those guys, going back and finding the next group of basketball players that are going to be the greats. And we're scouring the country.
That's why it's quite a few books down the road where Lan and Moiraine really, right now they're cool. They're cool because they're awesome. They start to become more interesting down the road as we start to get more of their points of view. Get more into their history, because right now they are those archetypes, and because we're looking at it from the view of these backwoods villagers who don't have the knowledge and don't have the confidence to challenge them, which is one of the ways down the road where they start to become more interesting. And that leads right into my next note, page 317 and 318. When
let me say something about Nyneave first, and that's something you get from the books you don't get from the show. Is there's a duality with her too, because she has this feeling for Moiraine for taking the boys out of the village, which is akin to a hatred almost. But she's also in awe. She's also increasingly impressed by this other woman, for every reason, not just the power. So she has this duality of thought where she is actually envious almost of the power that this woman can wield, that she knows, she's beginning to know she has within her, but at the same time a hatred for this woman for disrupting what was their normal daily life.
One of the other ways that we've said numerous times is that how this works, that the show doesn't work in shows like Amazon's Wheel of Time don't work, is because they tell, they don't show. So in this exchange where Moiraine is giving all this information, where she's talking to Lan, so you don't get explanations of this stuff because you're getting it in world. Okay, so it's not being written from our point of view, from someone outside the world. This is Moiraine talking. She's not going to explain all of these terms and all of these things. So he's dropping terminology here. Jordan's dropping terminology here and concepts here that you have to figure out from context clues because he's not explaining them. So it leaves a little bit of mystery, but it also pulls you in because he's showing you, he's not telling you. Now in a little bit, he will explain some of it. So because this is where Moiraine is talking to Lan, then all of a sudden stops, looks straight at Nynaeve's hiding spot and says, you can come out now. Okay, so now she's going to explain some of these things because she has to. So this is where, we start to learn a little more as the audience, because this is Nynaeve is our avenue into this world, because she is as clueless about some of these things as we are.
Not only that she can sense the power, but it's, I think in here in this section too, and correct me if I'm wrong, where she talks about the coins she gave the kids, and that was important, and you didn't get it in the show
Mhm.
that there's a reason she knew that everybody was still alive, and without the coin, it would have been something so simple to put in the show. Without that coin, that she had a connection to these boys, she wouldn't know anybody was still alive. But yet they didn't explain that at all in the show, which I thought was kind of integral.
Because they sideline her with that stupid injury. They sideline her, and then she doesn't even seem to care about them. It's just, well, we're going to Tar-Valon because they all know that we're going to Tar-Valon. She should be out of her mind looking for these boys, because that's her whole purpose in life.
Yep.
But anyway, so yeah, so we get, so it's multi-layered there. Not only do we get some information about the power and some of its uses, how it can be used, but then we also see more about Moiraine. He's showing us, not telling us, that she is a planner, not a schemer. That's, that's Nynaeve's term. That's how she looks at Moiraine. Moiraine is a planner. All right, she doesn't have a plan B. She has a plan Z, right? So that's part of her personality. It also, it kind of shows how she can be a step ahead, how it often seems like she knows more than everyone else, or knows more than she should. And it's not necessarily that she knew this was going to happen, but she planned for this potential contingency, and she's not going to show surprise. She's going to carry on. Okay, so then what was chapter 22? Why don't I have a note for that, or did I mess something up? Ah, here we go. Yeah, so chapter 22 and 23 here. So then we move from there. We end the chapter with what you were talking about, with really showing that conflicted feeling inside Nynaeve of she hates this woman because of what she did to these children, as Nynaeve still sees the boys and Egwene. She still sees them as children under her care. They're her responsibility. And so she hates Moiraine for that. But she's also, as much as she's scared of the power because of the stories that she's heard, she's also intrigued by it. She sees the potential in it, of what Nynaeve could do with it for good, as she sees Moiraine as doing not so good. But one of my first notes here for chapter 22 and 23, which kind of run together here with Perrin and Egwene's story, is right away we see the real beginnings of the gender dynamic that's going to carry through the whole story. That's so great, of the way, and it's not just how Perrin and Egwene act and react to each other. We see the why of it. That's what makes Jordan's writing of the gender dynamic so fun and sometimes funny.
Well, and you look at someone like Jordan, he was artistic, creative. And if you look at the history of the gender movements, this is like 80s and 90s feminism. That you are just as good, you are just as powerful, but different. Whereas today, it's everything's the same. I can do this was back when the movement was, I can do everything, you can do better, and so right now this would be an unpopular view on how this goes, but it's, I am just as good, but in a different way. And we see that developing here. This is where it really starts getting into it.
Yeah. And we don't get Egwene's perspective yet. We'll get her point of view down the road. But just from Perrin's point of view, even though it's from his point of view, you can see from the way Jordan sets the scenes that, this kind of conflict, if you will, is really simply because something that's a little newer in discussion, which is simply that we think differently, right? That we have a different way of thinking, and so a different way of looking at problems. And that is a large part, if not the part, of where these conflicts and arguments come from. Is they're coming from entirely different points of view and ways of thinking, even though it's like they're on a three-lane road. They're going the same direction, but one's in the left lane, one's in the right lane, so they're in their lanes, separated.
What was that movie back in the 90s with, was it Jack Nicholson and Helen Hunt?
As Good as It Gets.
As Good as It Gets, yeah.
How do you write women so well?
Well, I take a man and I take away reason and accountability. That was not Jordan. When he was asked that same question, because he apparently does write women very well, he said, well, I just asked my wife. There you go. Bypass, system hack right there.
Yep.
I asked a woman.
Well, who was, not only a woman, but also, kind of half in that world because she was his editor. So she had an artistic side to her as well. So also could help him not just understand the point of view and the way of thinking, but then help him write it as well. Give him, clues and assistance in actually putting it on paper and making it all seem real.
How far do we get in their story?
So we just meet Elyas.
Okay,
before we switch back to Matt and
which is again a disconnect from the modern version versus the book version, because I understand budgeting and getting characters and everything, but to bring the Wolf Brother part of this to reality, you needed that intermediary. It's not just the berserker mode he goes into. It's the human versus animal mode. There's a difference. And they kind of play the old art, modern day role playing, where it's the berserker in the show, whereas in the book it was, I don't want to lose my humanity. Yes, there are good things about these things that we used to be scared of, but at the same time, they are still animals and they do react with that lizard brain kind of mentality,
which you see when you start to get the pack interaction, where there's almost a humanity to them in the way they interact and the way Elyas interacts with them. But then, in the end, skipping ahead to the end, is as Perrin's falling asleep, he can almost sense burn. And just before the departing wolves faded from his mind, he felt a thought he knew came from burn, as sharp and clear as if it were his own thought. Hatred and the taste of blood. So there's that animal instinct, but it's also all too human, because Burn has a very personal reason for hating Trollocs so much and wanting to go after him, wanting to kill them. But going back a little bit, page 345 here. This is,
345. Okay.
This is something we keep mentioning, and here's a great example of it, of Jordan's way of layering things. So when Elyas is talking here, not only are we setting something up and learning about who Perrin is now and who he's going to be, but while he's doing that, he's also giving you more. He's showing you the world. He's showing you the mythology, the philosophy, the cosmology of the world, and things that are going to be important themes that run through the entirety of the series.
Well, and Elyas, one of the main points, I think, kind of the theme for this episode in a lot of these ways is he's a guide for that process.
Yes.
It's not this mentality of you'll get it when you need it. You'll have it when you need it, which we didn't get in the modern version. We throughout all of these books, you notice in these important characters' life, there's always some guide to the process, some training process, some intermediary to bridge the gap. which is how real life works.
Jumping back to the Nyneave chapter, that Moraine explains that if you don't have a guide, what was the number she uses? Like 1 in 5 girls who touch the power without a guide eventually are only 1 in 5 live.
And then some of the others burn out.
Yes, you either die from that, what she was talking about the fever and the reaction coming closer and closer to the touching, or you just burn yourself out because you don't know how to control it. So if you things that are this important, this dangerous, this difficult, you don't figure it out on your own, or if you do, you were lucky you managed to do it, because the overwhelming majority of people do not.
Well, I've got modern developmental examples for that. Again, using myself as an anecdote. So Nyneave was one of the lucky ones, right? She lived through it. She didn't burn herself out, but she had a block.
Yes.
And so there was a byproduct to it. So personally, myself, my brother was a year and a half older, and I always want everybody with an older brother wants to do what their brother does. How old's your brother's 2 years older than you?
No, he's also about a year and a half, about 18 months.
Yeah. And so I taught myself to read while he was learning how to read in school, and that created a block. As a lot of people that teach themselves to read, Robert Jordan taught himself to read, and he was reading Verne at whatever, all of that stuff, and he was one of the lucky ones that got through it and did well. Where I taught myself to read, and I have the bad habit of reading in my at the speed you can talk. So you say it in your head, and I can't read any faster than I can talk. And so that bad habit is common with people who teach themselves to read. So I cannot read quickly. I can't scan things. I can't just look over something really quick, because I have to read it in a voice as I go, which is cool when you're reading something written by somebody that you know their voice, and you can hear that, like Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules. I had his voice in my head going through it, and he talks really fast. So it actually made me read that book faster. But then I was reading Sam Harris, and he talks, he calls himself, I'm a famous slow talker. And his voice was in my head as I was reading, and it took me forever to get through a 150-page book or something from him. So, but again, it's a block that you form. And that's a modern example, a real world example of how, without proper guidance, sometimes you can get shot in the foot if you make it through the process in general. And I really think that they screwed the pooch with doing that with Perrin not having a guide.
Oh yeah.
Because it also makes it just not even make sense. He just looks at a wolf, and the wolf goes off, and you're like, okay, now he's got yellow eyes. All right, cool.
He's got yellow eyes, and wolves look at him funny. Yeah.
And he goes crazy every once in a while. And he killed his wife because of it, and he hates himself.
Yeah. Okay. Focus. Okay. Don't rant. This is an old thing, boy. Older than the Aes Sedai, older than anybody using the power, old as humankind, old as wolves.
Well, and again, remember the last episode we talked about the thinning of the fabric of time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Old things coming again. I'm not the only one. There are other things, other folk. Makes Aes Sedai nervous. Makes them mutter about ancient barriers weakening. Things are breaking apart, they say. They're afraid the Dark One will get loose, is what? You'd think I was to blame, the way some of them look at me. Redajah, anyway. But some others too. And then he goes on. So yeah, you're getting more of that world. You're getting more. Jordan is setting the stage for some of the more fantastical things to come. He's letting you know you are in a time of change. Okay, you are in a time of change where new things are coming, which, with his cosmology, these new things are old things, very old. It's the very beginning of the wheel of time turns and ages come to pass. The way he opens, every book, every chapter 1, and so all of these new things are actually things that are so old people forgot about them. And so not only is Elyas a guide to Perrin, but there he's being a guide to the reader as well.
So on a side note, Perrin has a quote right after that: "I'd like nothing better than to stay away from the Aes Sedai." The show has pissed me off because they made a Perrin, and they put a visual and an audio to him Whereas in the books, he's also described as having a really deep voice, no singing voice at all. He sounds like a frog croaking and everything. Well, the actor has that kind of whiny, high-pitched voice that he always sounds like he's nasally.
Always looks like he's about to cry.
Yeah, and I just read that in his voice, and I'm like, oh, you've ruined my Perrin voice.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh. Perrin is supposed to. He's the kid that got a deep voice early and was embarrassed about it because his voice was cracking when everybody else was normal. You know, the slow talker, but also shy. But he's bigger and stronger and got that burly deep voice.
Since you're on Perrin, that's something I did skip over that I should have mentioned, is that the opening of his chapter 22. I mean, right away from Perrin's point of view, you understand Perrin. Rand kind of mentioned it early on when he was thinking about, from his point of view, when he was thinking about his friends and how they were different. And now you see it. Perrin is a think the problem through, then figure out what's important, and first things first, and then get it done. Okay. That's his thinking. And we see that through all of his chapters. And then we see that develop into something even more as he becomes a more complicated character.
And again, it's something that could have been so simple in the show. They could have had him doing puzzles in his spare time. You know, the blacksmith puzzles he talks about while they're all sitting at the table. He could be just fidgeting, you know, and it would have shown a little bit deeper cognitive ability, where again, they just made him look like a big dumb oaf.
Exactly. And so I'm not really spoiling much here, and I'm going to use different kinds of terminology, but basically down the road, the way Perrin carries himself and the way he talks, the way I would analogize it is, people think he's a checkers player when he's actually a chess player. Because, and he wouldn't think about it in those terms. He's just thinking the problem through, but that's what he's doing. Is he's, you know, the difference between checkers and chess is it's a more complicated move set, and you have to think farther ahead, more moves ahead, which is why it's so difficult. And that's his style of thinking.
Well, yeah, if you wanna kind of analogize the three main boys with games, Matt is like roulette, you know, or you know, throwing dice. They use the dice for his character. Chess for Perrin, and freaking Settlers of Catan for Rand. Right? It's a little bit of everything in his boat. So it's one is super flighty, one is super structured, and the other has to be a little bit of everything.
Yeah. All right. So moving along so we can get to where we wanted to get. So then we switch, after we learned about the wolves, we switch back to Rand and Matt and Thom.
Right before we get to that, for those that are reading through the books with us, Elyas is, to me, one of the coolest characters in the whole thing. Yeah. From beginning to end, and he just pops up every once in a while. He is, so Thom is to Matt and Rand what Elyas is to Perrin. And it's integral in the Perrin story going to later, which I think, again, they're going to just completely write out of the whole show, with him going back home and everything.
Yep.
But again, it's that intermediary. It's that the mentor. The mentor, when you, again, and going back to real life, if you don't have a good mentor in your career, you're going to have a shit ton of problems having a good career. And one of the lucky things I stumbled across was I ended up in the training career having, early on in my career, 2008, 2009, some of the best mentors in the area accidentally. I got a job I wasn't qualified for because I showed up in a suit and had a good recommendation from one of the professors, and they thought they were just going to use me to clean stuff and handle clients they didn't want to deal with. But the director was one of the most respected strength coaches in the country. His assistant was he is one of the head strength coaches at the Olympic Training Center right now. And one of the head strength coaches for Kansas University was also there when he was early in his career. And all of these guys I got to learn from as I went up, and they went on to be, highly respected in across the nation. And I got to learn from these guys early in my career before they made it. So it was sheer luck. And I wouldn't be where I am training wise without their influence. So Elyas's role in Perrin's life at this point, again, passage of time, they're together for longer than you would think,
Right.
Because it takes time to travel by foot.
A long time
To travel by foot. And basically his life being turned upside down now that he knows wolves are in his head. You need somebody to take you through that process, or you're going to go crazy. And in fact, even his short time with Elyas wasn't enough for him to have that in his head when we come to future books, where he's still scared of this process.
He at least has the foundation so that he has a direction when he tries to figure things out on his own. To your analogy, when I was, wife kept telling me, you should be a trainer. You go to the gym all the time. You should be a trainer. No, I'm not going to be one of those trainers who just became a trainer because he goes to the gym all the time. And so finally, I told you I was thinking about getting certified to be a trainer. Where should I start? What should I do? And the first thing you told me is study anatomy. Because if you have that as your foundation, then it's easier to figure things out that you don't know, because you can think through the problem better. And so we've got that as a foundation for Perrin, and now we're about to get that as a foundation for Rand and Matt as we get to them.
Jazz Hands, spoiler alert. We'll put up the Jazz Hands for later. So my favorite book was book 3.
Yes.
And there's a moment in book 3 with Perrin where he comes across another person with the same gift.
Book 2.
That's book 2?
Yeah.
No, this on their way back from Falme. They're traveling from.
Yes. Nope. You're right. You're right.
Yeah.
It's the beginning of. I got book 3 and 4 confused there. That's what I was confused about. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So this is on their way to the most badass ending of all the books.
Yep.
Which is when we first see the Aiel. But he comes across another person with the same gift that didn't have a guide.
Right.
And that went down the slippery slope he's afraid of going down. And without Elyas in his life, he never would have made it through that moment.
Right.
Because he had an example of how it was good and an example of how it goes down the path he was afraid of.
Right.
And again, things that are probably being written out in the modern version.
Yep. You're making me mad here, because I was just thinking, can you imagine this is why we wanted and yet feared a screen adaptation of this, because can you imagine if you had people that knew how to write complex characters and knew how to set things up so that you would have a payoff? That is one of the best, most emotional scenes in the whole series. The interaction between Perrin and that villager whose name I forget, because it's from Perrin's point of view and the way he thinks about this guy, and then how this changes his mind and the way it thinks. And it's such an incredible, small, personal scene that I would love to see on the screen, but we're either not going to see it or it's going to be crap.
Well, and here's the main thing. All of the woke crap we complained about would have been perfectly fine had they included the depth that we're talking about here. I could care less about who looks like who or who sounds like who or what you do there if they had kept the depth. But it's the main complaints are all the things they cut out that you needed. And realistically, all us, the millions and millions and tens of millions of fans all over the world would have given them the viewership they needed had they started slower, developed the characters, and stuck more to the script that was already there for them, the source material. And we could have if you do it that way, then nobody complains about the DEI stuff because you're still creating art. And they just rely on we're going to do it this way, and if you complain, you're a bigot.
Yep.
And they made a modern a next episode of Sword of Shannara series, realistically.
A good example, counter example to what you're talking about there is I'm watching the 6th season of The Expanse right now.
I was just going to bring them up, where they actually did all the diversity stuff, and it's still good.
You have all this diversity stuff simply because it's whatever it is, 100 years or whatever into the future, and so you have, you know, basically a one world kind of thing. You have people spreading out, so you have this mix of cultures and races, and so you've got this you know, you've got this black woman, you've got this Indian guy, and as part of the kind of the main 4 there, and their color has nothing to do with anything. They're good characters, and the more you learn about them, the more depth you find in them, the more that is revealed that they become flawed, interesting, good, talented. They have all these things about them. So the more the story goes, the more you reveal about these characters. And so whether they cast these people because they were trying to check a diversity box or not is irrelevant to the end product, because they used the source material well, and then they adapted it well so that these characters had.
Oh, by the way, guys, hands for those that were.
Yep, and we're done.
Okay, oh yeah, we're done with spoilers. Now, from the show adaptation, have you heard of a guy named Clifton Duncan?
Name rings a bell, but
he's a black stage actor. He's done shows, but done TV shows and stuff, but he's a stage actor mainly, and he's kind of prominent in the Twitter feed because he's completely non-woke. And I saw a long interview with him. I think it was on Trigonometry. I think it was, but he talks about the state of Hollywood and everything, just like we talked about in our giving Rafe a little bit of benefit of the doubt episode. And he describes a thing that's been in acting for a long time, especially with minority actors, is there he had a word for it, and I can't remember what the word for it was, but the meaning of the word was being completely not what this person is supposed to be. So, like, for instance, being a black female Hamlet or something, being completely not the expectation, but performing so well everybody loves it. He said that's what a lot of minority actors on stage would try to do because it's a challenge. And he said the state of Hollywood now, though, is it's kind of the norm where you bring somebody to be that not thing to fill your diversity role, and it doesn't matter how you perform because nobody can complain. So he hates that the fact that what used to be a challenge and what used to separate the wheat from the chaff, you know, is something that's now being just normalized to fill quotas. And that's why he started speaking out, because now he can go get a role being this thing because of the color of his skin, and he's like, did I deserve the role? I don't know. I still try to perform at that level, but he's talked about also directors coming up to him and like, hey, you don't have to do all this. What did he say? One director of he was supposed to be like a Quasimodo type character, and he was doing all this stuff, and the guy's like, oh no, we consider having darker skin a disability in today's society anyway, so all you have to be is black. And he's like, what no, I'm going to play this to the best of my ability. And
well, that's insulting.
Yeah, I'm like, how are you this completely woke director is
he meant to be it as like sympathetic, but it's so patronizing and stupid that it's insulting as hell.
Yeah. So okay, on to the book. The book is much
onto the book before we get sidetracked, because that gives me more thoughts. But so this was more of what you wanted to get into, and let's move along as the boys travel to Whitebridge here. And I suggest we for the time being we skip chapter 25 and circle back to it, Saki back to it, when we get back to when we go back to Perrin and Egwene next time.
Yeah, because we get to the Tinkers there, right?
Yep. Because that's the traveling people. So let's just talk about chapter 25 and 26, which is the boat ride down to and then in White Bridge.
You mean 24 and 26?
24 and 26, yeah.
Yeah. Well, one thing about 24 is you get another dream, which was important. So again, it's not just a screaming face. It's a character with depth that is scaring the shit out of these kids because he's in their dreams, and they just found out that it's actually possibly a little bit real.
Exactly. And that was my first note here, is that I think there's something almost primal about dreams being more than just dreams. And that's a theme that's going to keep going. It's the very beginning, like you say, when we first meet, how are your dreams, Rand? So there's something more here. He's already set up and payoff. He's already set up that dreams are something important. And then we get the first dream in Barrelon that somehow what happens in a dream can affect reality. And now we're getting even deeper into it, that dreams can be downright deadly. Also, another thing you get here with the dreams is that, and so something that he set up, or we see first with with Elyas talking about how wolves communicate, is Jordan's able to use poetic language in his prose so that he gives you imagery and impressions to evoke feelings rather than painting you a scene with words. So there are times where one of the reasons I think this is so effective when he gets into this more kind of ethereal stuff is the way he's able to use language to kind of shift into something almost more like an epic poem. The way he talks, the way he writes with the wolf language and with the dreams, to kind of create an impression in your mind and let your own imagination fill in the gaps so that he can keep it kind of ethereal. So, it's kind of like the Lovecraftian idea of, he doesn't tell you what the monster looks like. He tells you how the character feels when he sees the monster.
Gosh, it's been a long time since I've read Lovecraft. It's good stuff. Now, what I wanted to get into with Rand and Matt is, just like we talked about with Elyas, is Thom. So this is the point where Thom starts teaching them how to better play the flute, how to juggle, and all of these. And these are skills that they end up having to use going forward. And it is basically...
But also teaching them about life. So like Lan was their first teacher, but he wasn't really a guide, because he was just teaching them how to use weapons. He wasn't really teaching them about life and the world. So you get kind of right off the bat here when he's talking about how the crew is getting a little bit mutinous, and then Thom on page 354 is where he's explaining that if they mutiny, boy, they won't leave passengers behind to tell the tale. The Queen's writ might not have much force this far from Camelin, but even a village mayor will do something about that. That was when Rand 2 began trying not to be noticed when he watched the crewmen. So he's teaching them, as he tells Matt, I don't know how to pretend to teach. I just do a thing, or I don't. So he is teaching them actual skills that they are learning and getting better at, but he's also teaching them the why of it. That this is how you navigate life. You're out of your village now, and things are much more complicated and much more potentially dangerous.
It's a continuation of a father figure, realistically.
Yes.
And I think that's one thing that ties it into what's going to be in the next video. Let's see, Rand in his dream. Yeah, the crew. Yeah, this is why I thought we could move faster, because the main point of it is we basically talked about in depth with Elyas, and we need these intermediaries for a lot of things to make sense. It isn't just you're going to be able to do it when the time comes. It's we need to develop a skill set to do it when the time comes. You don't kick the game-winning field goal without having kicked a million in practice, without having a whole career of getting to that point. So has anybody, if you've ever tried to kick a field goal, it's harder than it looks.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Or
I
even
tried
just
kicking extra points in high school, and I could only manage like 1 out of 5.
I wasn't a bad kicker. I hated that I was the only person that could long snap on our team
Yeah.
because I never got to kick. So it's for any of you that do play football, if anybody plays football that reads Wheel of Time that's watching this right now, and you're young, and this is what I tell all when I work with athletes, if they're kind of undersized or whatever, learn to kick, punt, or you place kick, punt, or snap. If you're an in-between size guy and you can snap well, I trained a guy named Thomas Gafford. He played for Kansas City Chiefs for, I think he was with them for 6 years. I know he had a 6-year contract, but the guy made $700,000 a year, played 2 or 3 plays a game because he could snap the ball back to the punter, in I think it was 0.65 seconds, and then place it where the punter wanted it. That he was too small to be a tight end, but he was listed as a tight end. He was too small, but he could place that ball. And he made more than twice as much as a doctor because he had this skill. So if you're an in-between size guy and you're relatively athletic, learn to place kick, punt, or snap, and you'll have a place on any football team.
Yep.
It's a skill. And that's where Thom came in with these. He taught them skills that they needed to develop over the course of riding down the river on this boat.
Mm-hmm. So I found what I was looking for, because you said you mentioned about the father figure, and I'm jumping way ahead since we're kind of mushing these 2 chapters, but page 395. And we can backtrack to set this up if you want in a second, but I just want to set up the why. So this is when they're sneaking out, they're in trouble. Plans have gone awry, as they always do. But it's not just a father figure for the boys, but for Thom as well. We find out why he has such a kinship to the boys. And we really only very briefly see it. I had a nephew, he said, wearily shrugging out of his cloak. He made a pile with his blanket roll as he talked, carefully setting his cased instruments on top. My brother's only son, my only living kin. He got in trouble with the Aes Sedai, but I was too busy with other things. I don't know what I could have done, but when I finally tried, it was too late. Owen died a few years later. You could say the Aes Sedai killed him. He straightened up, not looking at them. His voice was still level, but Rand glimpsed tears in his eyes as he turned his head away. If I can keep you 2 free of Tar Valon, maybe I can stop thinking about Owen. So, because they want to know, why are you doing all this? Matt especially, who's becoming more and more withdrawn and suspicious. Why are you helping us? I don't trust that you're just doing this out of the goodness of your heart. And he is, but he isn't. I mean, that goodness of his heart comes from something specific that has,
as with all of us on everything.
Yeah.
We has get into free will debate there, but
he has a strong connection, strong empathy towards these boys, because he doesn't want to see them hurt by getting tangled up with Tar Valon. That's why he's doing this. That's why he's being such a strong father figure for them. And then it's not just the skills, it's the teaching them about life, so that, he knows he doesn't have enough time to teach them everything, but he's got to give them some kind of foundation, because you have Tar Valon that's existed for thousands of years, populated by Aes Sedai who can live for hundreds of years, and all they do is scheme, all they do is plan. And so if you're mixed up in that, then by golly, you need to be fortified against it. You need to be able to stand up for yourself and see through some of this.
I think that's a good place to end, because we'll start with a dramatic scene then next time with the White Bridge incident, which they did horribly in the show. So we'll end that here. I'm going to cut this off. So if you want to continue the conversation, click on part 2. Like, share, subscribe. For those that like the Wheel of Time stuff, we always make it clear in the title when we're doing a Wheel of Time episode versus
and what chapters we're doing. So
yep,
we don't get ahead of you.
But for now, we're going to take a quick bathroom break, and we'll be back in part 2.